The Hunter is the single most important bioweapon Umbrella ever created. Not the Tyrant, not the Licker, the Hunter. Because it was the first one that actually worked, and the process they used to make it is genuinely one of the most disturbing things in the entire franchise. Today, I'm breaking down every single Hunter variant ever made, and how each one evolved from the last. Starting with the one that started it all, Hunter Alpha. In 1981, a young William Birkin had an idea: take a human embryo, infect it with a specially engineered strain of the T-virus about 3 weeks after fertilization, and then splice in reptilian DNA. The goal was simple: create a living weapon that could think just enough to follow orders, but not enough to disobey them. The problem was that every attempt at making a human-derived bioweapon before this had failed for the same reason. The T-virus destroyed the cerebral neocortex. Every time, no exceptions. You'd get something strong, sure, but it would have zero ability to process commands. Basically, a very angry vegetable with claws. Birkin's breakthrough was preventing that brain erosion entirely using the Beta 2 strain as a bonding agent, and it only took him roughly 17 years to get it right. 17 years of infected embryos and failed prototypes, but by the late 1990s, the MA121 was combat ready, and Umbrella had its first fully functional, marketable bioorganic weapon. Here's what rolled off the production line: a green-scaled, hunchback, lizard-like humanoid with razor-sharp claws formed from its own transformed bone. Its keratinized scales possessed the same structural intensity as Kevlar fiber, so good luck with your standard-issue sidearm. Intelligence-wise, the Alpha sat at roughly arthropod level, not winning any spelling bees, but it could execute around 10 distinct command types, and when you put them in packs, things got genuinely terrifying. One hunter would leap behind the target as a distraction, while a second closed the distance for the kill. Coordinated, practiced, ruthless. Their signature attack involved dashing from 10 to 15 feet away, then either closing to chest level to tear you apart with those bone claws, or launching into a jumping arc aimed directly at your head. They were designed specifically to fight trained soldiers. Zombies were target practice. Hunters were the thing that made target practice irrelevant. Every single Alpha was cloned exclusively female, each one taking approximately a year to reach maturity under repeated growth hormone exposure. And once Umbrella realized they could mass produce these things cheaply, the floodgates opened. But the Alpha was just the proof of concept. The Umbrella looked at what Birkin built and immediately started asking how they could make it better, which brings us to the variant that traded raw power for something arguably more dangerous: Hunter Beta. So Umbrella looked at the Alpha and said, we can do better. And technically, they did. They also technically made it worse. The Hunter Beta is one of the most contradictory bioweapons Umbrella ever produced, and it's a perfect snapshot of what happens when a corporation confuses different with improved. Here's the setup. The Beta carried the same MA121 development code as the Alpha, and was developed by Umbrella USA as a direct upgrade to Birkin's original work. By this point, cloning costs had dropped low enough that Umbrella could throw extensive genetic modifications at the template without burning through their budget. More resources, more freedom, better hunter. That was the plan. The result was something faster, uglier, weaker, and half blind. Let me explain. The Beta's agility levels rose astoundingly compared to the Alpha. We're talking instantaneous force acceleration sufficient to dodge incoming projectiles. This thing could see a bullet coming and move out of the way. That's genuinely terrifying, but the offensive capabilities actually reduced. So you've got a hunter that's harder to shoot, but easier to survive if it catches you, which is, not ideal for a weapon designed to kill things. And then there's the appearance. The genetic remodeling caused grotesque red tumor-like growths to spread across the Beta's face and upper body, severely impairing its vision. So now your upgraded hunter can barely see. It also developed asymmetric claws, with the left hand always growing larger than the right, forcing every single specimen to be automatically left-handed. Every Beta that ever existed was left-handed. Not by choice, by deformity. I don't know what to tell you, but here's where it gets interesting. Despite being weaker and partially blind, the Beta demonstrated more sophisticated pack behavior than the Alpha. These things showed greater organizational complexity in their hunting formations, making real-time tactical adjustments when pursuing prey. Smarter together, even if individually less lethal. 20 Hunter Beta specimens were deployed during the 1998 Raccoon City incident, setting up shop inside Spencer Memorial Hospital. That's where Carlos Oliveira ran into them while desperately searching for a cure for Jill Valentine. Picture sprinting through a crumbling hospital hallway while a pack of tumor-covered, left-handed lizard monsters coordinate an ambush around you. Great evening. The beta raised a genuine internal debate at Umbrella. Was a faster but weaker and deformed hunter actually an improvement? Some saw the enhanced agility and pack tactics as a clear step forward. Others looked at the reduced offensive power and the fact that the thing could barely see out of its own tumor-covered face, and called it a lateral move at best. And if you think the beta's identity crisis was bad, wait until you see what happened when Umbrella Europe decided to throw reptile DNA in the trash entirely and build a hunter out of a frog. Hunter Gamma. So the alpha was built by Umbrella USA. The beta was actually developed by Umbrella Europe as their first attempt at improving the formula. And then someone at that same European branch looked at the beta and said, "That's cute, we're going to do something completely different." And what they came up with was genuinely one of the strangest creatures in the entire hunter lineup. The Hunter Gamma, designated MA124 throughout the entire alpha playbook. See, the alpha was created by injecting reptilian DNA into a human embryo. The Gamma flipped that process entirely. Instead of putting animal DNA into a human egg, Umbrella Europe bonded human DNA into a fertilized amphibian egg, using the T-virus as the genetic glue holding the whole thing together. It's a complete inversion of the original method, and it produced something that barely looks like it belongs in the same family as the alpha. Here's the thing, Umbrella had experimented with amphibian biology before, and the results were never pretty. Amphibian-based BOW research had a track record of producing things that were scientifically interesting, but operationally worthless. But the European division figured enough technology had improved, enough data had been gathered, and they could make it work this time. The development team internally nicknamed the creature Frogger, which is honestly the most personality any Umbrella scientist has ever shown. The Gamma measured 183 centimeters, roughly 6 feet tall, and despite that frog nickname, its actual biology leaned way more toward salamanders. This thing was wet, bulbous, and fundamentally alien compared to anything the American branch had produced. Where the Alpha felt like a weaponized lizard, the Gamma felt like something that crawled out of a drainage pipe and decided it hated you personally. But here's where the ambition falls apart, because the Gamma had two massive problems. First, it had a pronounced sensitivity to heat. Not mild discomfort and warm weather sensitivity, genuine operational compromise. You couldn't deploy this thing anywhere temperatures climbed above comfortable, which eliminates roughly half the planet. Second, whenever the Gamma fed, it exposed vulnerable mandibles that could be targeted with focused gunfire. So it had a giant shoot here sign that appeared every single time it tried to eat something, which is, not ideal for a weapon designed to eat things. The result? The Gamma was created in 1998, and by that same year, Umbrella had already ordered numerous batches of specimens destroyed. That's like buying a car, driving it off the lot, and pushing it into a river before you get home. The creature appeared in RE3, Nemesis and RE Outbreak, but it was restricted almost entirely to aquatic environments because it literally couldn't function anywhere else. The Gamma is the weird cousin of the Hunter family, a fascinating experiment that proved you could bond human DNA into an amphibian egg and get a viable organism out of it. But viability and practicality are two very different things, and Umbrella Europe learned that lesson the expensive way. But if the Gamma was an attempt to reinvent the Hunter from scratch, the next variant went in the opposite direction entirely. Sweeper. Most Hunter variants feel like Umbrella threw a monster into a room and hoped for the best. The Sweeper is the first one that makes you realize they were actually thinking about this, like, strategically, with a whiteboard and everything. The Sweeper was a specialized variation of the Hunter 2 model, and its name tells you exactly what it was designed to do. Standard Hunter 2 units would be deployed first to tear through an area, engaging primary targets, causing chaos, doing what hunters do best. Then the Sweepers would follow behind to mop up anyone who survived the initial wave. That's not just release the monsters, that's a coordinated two-wave assault doctrine. Umbrella had literally developed military strategy around these things, and the Sweeper wasn't just a Hunter 2 with a different job title. It looked fundamentally different. Where standard Hunter 2 specimens had the typical reptilian green coloration, Sweepers had distinctly reddish skin, purple veins running visibly across their bodies, light purple scales, and piercing red eyes. The whole creature looked like it was running hot, like something toxic was coursing through every inch of it, because something was. The Sweeper's claws carried a poisonous effect that standard Hunter 2 claws didn't have, created by incorporating venomous reptile genes during the genetic engineering process. And here's the thing, the toxicity wasn't limited to just the claws. The venom production systems were integrated throughout the sweeper's entire body. That reddish skin wasn't cosmetic. It was a visible side effect of the creature being saturated with its own poison from head to toe, which is, not ideal if you're the person standing in front of it. The attack patterns remained fundamentally the same as a standard hunter too. Rapid approach, close the distance, slash. But that added poison changed the equation completely. If you had body armor, if you had defensive equipment, if you were tough enough to survive a standard claw strike, congratulations, you still got poisoned. The venom was specifically advantageous against targets that could physically resist conventional slash damage. Umbrella essentially designed a failsafe into the cleanup crew. Even if you could tank a hit, the toxin would finish the job. All of this was created in 1998 during Umbrella's peak operational period, and the implications are genuinely unsettling when you sit with them for a second. This wasn't a corporation experimenting with monsters in a lab. This was a corporation that had moved past the experimentation phase entirely and was now developing integrated combat systems. Standard hunters were the first wave, sweepers were the second. Each unit had a defined role within a larger tactical framework. The hunters weren't individual creatures anymore, they were components. The sweeper is one of those variants that doesn't get enough attention, probably because it looks like a palette swap at first glance. But underneath that red skin is evidence that Umbrella had stopped thinking about hunters as standalone bioweapons and started thinking about them the way a military thinks about infantry divisions. First contact, then cleanup, no survivors. But if the sweeper represented Umbrella refining their tactics, the next variant represented them refining the hunter itself into something far more dangerous. Hunter Elite, so we've seen Umbrella go smaller, we've seen them go faster, we've seen them go poisonous. Now, with the Hunter Elite, they decided to just go bigger, way bigger. And honestly, there's something kind of desperate about it. The Hunter Elite was a large and formidable bioorganic weapon that maintained the same basic reptilian anatomy as the standard Alpha model, but cranked the size up substantially. We're talking a creature that towered over regular hunters while keeping those same razor-sharp claws, that same predatory intelligence, and that same, I'm going to sprint at you and remove your head energy. But now, in a package that could take significantly more punishment before going down. The increased mass meant increased strength, increased durability, and a dramatically reduced chance that conventional ballistic weaponry would do anything meaningful to stop it. Which is, not ideal if you're the one holding the gun. The Elite also broke from the established hunter color palette. Where the Alpha had been that iconic green, the Elite came in red. Not a subtle shift either, a full departure from the visual standard that had defined the Hunter line up to that point. Whether this was a byproduct of whatever genetic modifications produced the size increase or an intentional aesthetic choice to make the thing look scarier to potential buyers, the result was the same. You saw red scales charging at you down a hallway. You knew this wasn't a regular Hunter. Here's where the context gets interesting. The Hunter Elite appeared exclusively in Resident Evil, Dead Aim, a 2003 PS2 light gun shooter that blended first-person aiming with third-person movement. And the year matters. By 2003, Umbrella was done. Not struggling, done. Not restructuring, done. The corporation was in full collapse, selling everything it had to the highest bidder on the black market just to keep the lights on for another quarter. The Hunter Elite was born out of that desperation. When your company is crumbling and you need to move product fast, you don't sell subtlety. You sell size. You sell ferocity. You build the biggest, scariest thing you can, and you let some warlord's procurement officer take one look at it and reach for his checkbook. The Elite designation practically screams sales brochure. This wasn't a creature designed for nuanced tactical deployment. This was Umbrella's late-stage pitch to arms dealers. Look how big this one is. Look how much damage it can take. Buy 6. But the real brilliance of the Hunter Elite, from a pure horror standpoint, comes from where you actually fight it. Dead Aim takes place almost entirely on a ship. Narrow corridors, low ceilings, tight corners everywhere. Now imagine something substantially larger than a standard hunter barreling toward you in a space where you can barely turn around. There's nowhere to run. There's barely anywhere to dodge. The confined ship environment transformed the Elite's size from a simple stat increase into genuine claustrophobic terror. A regular hunter in an open field is dangerous. A Hunter Elite in a hallway barely wide enough for 2 people is a nightmare you can't wake up from. Dead Aim remains one of the more obscure entries in the Resident Evil catalog, which means the Hunter Elite is a genuine deep cut. Most casual fans have never encountered one, but for the dedicated players who tracked down that weird light gun shooter and found themselves face to face with a red-scaled monster twice the size of anything they'd fought before, in a space designed to make escape impossible. The Hunter Elite left an impression that standard alphas never could, but if you think Umbrella was done experimenting with the Hunter formula during their final days, wait until you hear about Glimmer. Glimmer. The Glimmer is a byproduct of the Hunter Gamma line, but not one that any Umbrella researcher sat down and engineered. It emerged as an unintended mutation, a biological accident born from the instability baked into the Gamma's amphibian DNA. When you're splicing human and frog genetics together and cutting corners on quality control, sometimes the offspring don't come out the way the manual says they should. The Glimmer is what happens when a Hunter Gamma reproduction cycle goes sideways and nobody's around to course correct, which is, not ideal when your entire business model depends on controlling the things you create. And honestly, it's one of the most interesting hunters in the entire franchise. Picture a squat, slimy, aggressively frog-like creature with elongated digits and a wide, toothless mouth. Now put multiple luminous red compound eyes on top of its head. Not normal eyes, clustered, glowing, bulbous things that look more like tumors or open sores than anything functional. Those glowing eyes are what gave it the name Glimmer, and they're exactly as unsettling as they sound. Here's where it gets weird. The mutation that gave the Glimmer its signature eyes also made it far more sensitive to light than any hunter before it. Bright environments were essentially hostile territory. But in exchange, the Glimmer developed something no other hunter in the entire lineage ever had. A ranged biological attack. The creature could vomit powerful acid directly onto opponents. Its stomach produced excessive amounts of acid originally meant for rapid food digestion, and that system got weaponized into a genuine ranged combat tool. Every other hunter in history closes the distance and uses its claws. The Glimmer sat back and melted you from a distance. That's a complete departure from the entire hunter combat doctrine, and it happened by accident. The Glimmer's amphibious Gamma heritage made it perfectly suited for dark, waterlogged environments, flooded infrastructure, neglected underground sections. Anywhere that combined standing water with low light became prime territory. The Glimmers thrived in those conditions, doing what creatures do when you leave them alone in a habitat they're perfectly suited for. No genetic engineering, no intentional breeding programs, just Umbrella's own neglected facilities becoming an incubator for something they never planned. They built a whole ecosystem in Umbrella's basement. Cool. Add that to the list of things Umbrella caused by not paying attention. But here's the part that makes the Glimmer genuinely stand out. Unlike every other hunter variant on this list, the Glimmer never saw widespread deployment. It never got mass-produced. It never became a marketable bioweapon. It existed in the margins, a footnote in Umbrella's catalog of horrors that the company never bothered to study, refine, or replicate. The Glimmer holds a distinction that almost no other hunter variant can claim. It was never intentionally created, never deliberately weaponized, and never considered worth the effort of understanding. Umbrella looked at it and basically shrugged. But while the Glimmer was a messy byproduct of negligence, Umbrella's core labs were busy proving that the best way to move forward was actually to slim down. Hunter R. The Hunter R is where Umbrella figured out that bigger isn't always better. This variant took a different approach to the hunter concept, prioritizing speed and agility over raw size and brute force. The result was a creature with a more pronouncedly reptilian appearance than anything in the hunter line before it. Leaner and meaner in every way that mattered. And here's the thing, it was noticeably smaller than both the alpha and beta models. Now, normally in the world of bioweapons, smaller means worse. Less muscle, less reach, less ability to rip a person in half. But the Hunter R found the sweet spot. That reduced size granted it considerably faster movement speed and made it significantly harder to hit with conventional weapon. You're not trying to shoot a 6-foot lizard charging at you anymore. You're trying to shoot something smaller and quicker that moves like it's been launched out of a cannon, which is, not ideal. The trade-offs were surprisingly minimal. The R developed smaller claws than the standard Hunter models, sure, but its overall design was more streamlined and efficient. It looked less like a failed experiment and more like something that had been refined down to its most dangerous essential. Less bulk, more purpose, every unnecessary element stripped away until all that was left was a compact killing machine, and Umbrella clearly saw potential in the design, because the Hunter R was considered successful enough for continued deployment. That's a big deal. Most Hunter variants stayed in the prototype or limited deployment phase. The R proved itself operationally viable enough to keep showing up. It graduated from interesting experiment to we're actually using these in the field, but the most fascinating part isn't the deployment record. It's what the Hunter R's existence says about how Umbrella operated. They weren't weren't just making bioweapons bigger and scarier for the sake of it, they were iterating, testing, figuring out which combinations of traits actually produced results in combat scenarios. The Hunter R was proof that Umbrella's R&D division occasionally stumbled into something resembling rational engineering. What if we made it faster instead of larger? Groundbreaking stuff, honestly. Someone in that lab deserved a raise. They probably got eaten instead, but still. The Hunter R appeared in Resident Evil Outbreak in 2003, and Resident Evil Outbreak File 2 in 2004, terrorizing players across both entries in the Outbreak series. That continued presence wasn't accidental. It reflected proven tactical value. Umbrella kept deploying these things because they worked consistently, reliably. The R wasn't flashy, it wasn't the biggest or the scariest, it was just effective. And in the bioweapons business, effective is what gets you repeat deployment. Arguably, the Hunter R is one of the most practically successful variants in the entire Hunter line. Not the most powerful, not the most terrifying, but the one that actually demonstrated its value well enough to justify continued use across multiple operations. Umbrella got real mileage out of these things. That's a return on investment most corporations would kill for, which, coincidentally, is also what the Hunter R was designed to do. But if the R proved that downsizing could work, the next variant took that concept and pushed it just a little too far, Hunter MU. So after the Hunter R proved that smaller could actually mean better, Umbrella did what any reasonable corporation would do. They pushed the concept further and made it worse. The Hunter Mu, named after the Greek letter, was a smaller version of the R series representing Umbrella's continued obsession with miniaturization. And on paper, the logic made sense. The R had succeeded by trimming down the Alpha's frame, trading raw size for speed and agility. So naturally, someone at Umbrella looked at the R and thought, what if we made it even smaller? The answer, it turns out, was disappointing. The Mu possessed inferior mobility and combat ability compared to the Hunter R across the board. Every metric that mattered in a combat scenario got worse. The R had been the sweet spot, the perfect balance between size reduction and functional performance, and the Mu proved definitively that pushing past those parameters meant diminishing returns. You can only shrink a killing machine so much before it stops being effective at the killing part. Here's the thing though, despite being objectively worse than the R in execution, the Hunter Mu maintained exactly the same attacks and firepower as other Hunter variants. Same humanoid, lizard-like frame, same cat-like reflexes, same instantaneous strike capabilities. On a spec sheet, it looked identical. In practice, it just couldn't deliver those capabilities with the same effectiveness. It's like buying a sports car engine and putting it in a golf cart. All the power is technically there. The platform just can't use it properly. Classified as an experimental bioweapon, created in 1998, the Mu first showed up in Resident Evil Outbreak File 2 in 2004, and the context of where Umbrella kept these things tells you everything you need to know about how the corporation viewed them. Several specimens were held in storage at Umbrella's corporate headquarters in Raccoon City, not shipped to clients, not deployed in the field, not marketed to military buyers, stored at headquarters, and their primary function? Training opponents for Tyrant-class creature development. That's it. Umbrella literally turned them into punching bags. The company that created them looked at the finished product, decided they weren't worth selling, and fed them to Tyrants so the Tyrants could practice fighting something that fights back. Which is, not exactly a glowing performance review. The Mu represents the definitive endpoint of the Hunter line's miniaturization philosophy. The Alpha established the template. The R refined it by going smaller and faster. And the Mu proved there was a floor, a point where shrinking the design any further just produced a worse version of something that already existed. Umbrella, to their credit, seemed to recognize this immediately. No mass production, no external sales, no MA designation for widespread cloning. Just a handful of specimens locked in a basement, waiting to get slapped around by whatever Tyrant was in development that week. But if the Mu showed what happens when you make a Hunter worse, the next variant showed what happens when you make one meaner. Hunter Delta. Every weapon has a last model, a final version that rolls off the production line before the factory goes dark. For the Hunter series, that's the Delta. And what makes it interesting isn't just what it could do, it's where it showed up and what that meant for the entire world. By 2003, Umbrella was a dying animal, governments were closing in, assets were being seized, and the corporation that once operated with near total impunity was watching its empire get dismantled piece by piece. But here's the thing about a collapsing megacorporation with bioweapon divisions scattered across the globe. Not every division gets the memo at the same time. Some of them just keep working, and the Hunter Delta is proof of exactly that. 3 Hunter Delta specimens were encountered by Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine at an Umbrella facility in the Caucasus region. Even as the corporation was being torn apart by international authorities, this facility was still fully operational, still producing, still acting like the world hadn't caught on yet. Nothing says Tuesday in the Resident Evil universe quite like 2 elite operatives storming a bioweapon facility in frozen Russia to clean up yet another mess Umbrella refused to stop making. But the Caucasus facility raises a question way more unsettling than the creatures themselves. This wasn't some legacy site running on autopilot. Umbrella was still actively developing bioweapons even as the walls closed in. The corporation knew it was finished, and instead of shutting down production, it doubled down. The Hunters had gone from corporate secret to product line being pushed out the door as fast as possible before the lights went off for good. The Delta represented the latest evolutionary stage of the Hunter line, built during Umbrella's final years specifically for their black market weapons program. These weren't research specimens sitting in a containment pod. These were finished goods designed to be sold to the highest bidder, whether that was a paramilitary group, a wealthy warlord, or some private military outfit that wanted the biological equivalent of a tank that could climb walls. And the fact that it took Chris and Jill to deal with just 3 of them tells you everything about the Delta's combat capability. These are 2 of the most experienced bioweapon fighters on the planet, veterans of Raccoon City, survivors of the Mansion incident, the absolute top tier of people you'd want between you and a hunter. And the Delta still required their direct intervention. Not local police, not military, the best of the best. Here's where the real weight sits though. It's not just a stronger hunter, it's the last designed hunter, the final chapter of Umbrella's intentional development before the corporation was completely dismantled. Every alpha, beta, gamma, and everything in between led to this. Decades of genetic engineering, field testing, and optimization culminating in a creature Umbrella was frantically trying to sell off because they were too busy collapsing to use it themselves. The Delta proved something deeply uncomfortable about the Hunter program. The Hunters outlived their creators. Umbrella fell, but the weapons they built didn't disappear. They were already circulating through black markets, sitting in the arsenals of organizations. With zero oversight and zero accountability, you can shut down a corporation, but you can't unsell a bioweapon. That's the real legacy of the Hunter Delta. Not its claws, not its speed, not whatever specific genetic modifications made it deadlier than its predecessors. The legacy is that it proved the Hunter line had escaped corporate control entirely. Umbrella spent decades building the perfect biological weapon, and their final achievement was making sure it would persist long after they were gone, which is, not ideal. Umbrella spent decades trying to perfect the Hunter. Nature did something more interesting without trying at all. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.